Welcome to the Big Bot Bash of 2026. This is going to be a large project and therefore a long video. So grab a snack, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. If you don't know what the Big Bot Bash is, I'll explain. It was created by Buildmaking Stuff, who is a talented maker here on YouTube. He designed this random attribute generator where you use a d20, which is a 20-sided die, to roll for different descriptive attributes that you use to create a bot. Each descriptor or attribute is open to interpretation, and with 20 options per roll and 5 items to roll for, that means that everyone participating is almost guaranteed to roll a unique combination. This is a self-set challenge and is in no way a competition. It's just a fun way to force some creativity and build some awesome bots. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few participants this year, so search for hashtag bigbotbash3 if you want to see a bunch more talented artists make some cool bots. So here is what I rolled. Head, pointy, arms, stick, body, bones, legs, sharp, and flavor, medic. And yes, that is the British spelling of flavor, as Bill is from the UK. Let's start with the main body. I'm going to use these larger plastic parts to build up the basic shape and then use smaller plastic pieces to fill the gaps and any open space remaining. I'm going to go with this hunched shrimp shape because I think it looks cool, so I add a plastic wedge here to force that curved shape. And now that I have a basic frame to work from, I can add more plastic parts to fill out the shape and add some shoulders. You may be thinking that this doesn't look very bone-like, but I promise that the bones will come later. I'm going for more of a robot body that has bones attached to it like armor or decoration. So for now, I just keep adding parts until I find the shape that I'm looking for. This is one of my favorite parts I'm adding. It's from an old broken Bionicles toy, and the shape fits really nicely into what I've built so far. The blades here also tie in well with the sharp legs that I'll be building in a bit. At this point, the shape is complete. I just have to fill in all the small gaps with greeblies and other pieces of plastic to make sure that it all looks like one solid body. This process is actually pretty easy and quite satisfying. It just takes some time to test out parts and then cut and shape them to fit properly. As I've talked about before, much of trash bashing like this is just a trust the process kind of thing. Just keep putting parts together and testing things out until you've got a completed bot. The last step is to create a space for the legs to attach to. For that, I'll use these 3 bottle caps and I'll glue them together and then I'll attach them to the main body. The head needs to be pointy, and I'd say this skull is pretty pointy. It's a resin cast from years ago when I was first teaching myself how to make silicone molds and how to cast with resin. It's been in my box of parts for like 5 years now, and I'm super excited to finally use it on a project. Also, with it being a bone, it works well with the body attribute. And just to prove to you all that it is indeed pointy, I've gone ahead and stabbed this thick piece of paper to prove that it's pointy. I want to add some mechanical robotic parts to the bird skull, so I'm going to use this as a lower jaw. I think it's also part of a bionicle, but I'm not sure. I'll add some extra plastic parts to it, but I'll keep everything separate to make sure that I can paint everything a bit easier later. And that's going to be a recurring theme throughout this build, keeping a lot of the parts separate for ease of painting. I'm looking out for my future self who has to paint all of this, but that does mean that I do have quite a few separate pieces that I have to keep track of and make sure I don't lose. The head is pretty simple compared to the rest of the components, but I think there'll be a really cool contrast between the bone color and the metallic color. At this point in the build, I still wasn't sure how I wanted to interpret the sharp legs. I had gathered some parts up that I knew I could make a solid pair of legs with, they just wouldn't be sharp. So I decided I would just build a set of legs that I knew would work with the overall body shape, and then later I would figure out how to make them sharp. A lot of the parts you're seeing here come from various toys picked up from local thrift stores. This section here is going to become the knee joint, so I cut out space to fit the round part of the lower leg. Then I'll use some epoxy putty to fill the open spaces in the plastic and create a stronger connection between the parts. That was EP400, which is, funny enough, the exact same as EP200 that I've used in the past. It's just twice as long and twice as much material. Thought that was kind of funny. I press the parts together and then clean up the squeeze out with my fingers and some isopropyl alcohol. For the lower leg, this white plastic part here will be the main frame, and this gray bionicle leg will act as shin guards. With some slight modification, they fit together well, and I'll keep this ball joint to use as an ankle, as it fits into this other toy foot that isn't a bionicle, but is the right size for the ball joint. It's always nice to use posable joints when I can, as it makes it easier to get the bot into its final position later, and I don't have to do as much guessing work. The two halves of the leg will be held together with some pins for extra stability, and then I'll just add some extra greeblies and bits to fill in any open spaces and add some details. And there we have it, one fully completed leg, and now I just build a second one to match. At this point, I still didn't know how I was going to make the legs sharp, so I set them aside and I'll come back to them later. For the arms, I rolled stick. Now, you're allowed to interpret these attributes however you'd like, and I'm going to go pretty far outside the box on this one. Because I've been keeping the overall flavor of medic in mind, I'm going to interpret stick as needle stick. When you get a shot or a vaccine with a needle, it's sometimes called a stick. More often, it's used when a needle accidentally punctures your skin and they call it an accidental needle stick injury. Using various toy parts that aren't from the same toy but still fit together using those ball joints, I build up a basic arm and shoulder shape. I'll use parts of this plastic tube to make some armor for the lower arm to match the one on the upper arm. Because this bot is so large, I'm going to have to build my hands from scratch. I won't be able to use the Gundam hands that I've often used in the past for other models. For the fingers, I'll use the same technique I came up with in the last build, just much larger. Now this is an extremely detailed diagram on how each finger is built. They'll be made of styrene rods, and each section will be ½ an inch long. Each section will then be connected by a small oval of styrene on each side. Each hand will have 3 fingers on top and then a thumb on the side, and the thumb will have 2 sections instead of 3, like the top 3 fingers. This is the styrene I'll be using, and I'll cut it up into those ½ sections and then round the sides, as well as making one of the sides pointy. The oval connectors are made with this thinner styrene sheet, and I'll use this badge hole cutter to cut out the shapes. The cutouts it makes on its own are a bit too large, but I can carefully recut those cutouts into the small oval shapes using some tweezers to hold that original cutout, and then using the hole cutter to cut off the ends. Using a wax-tipped rhinestone pen, I can attach the oval bits to the finger sections, connecting them all together. To add a bit of extra detail to each joint, I'm going to take this piece of plastic, cut it up into little circles, and then cut those circles in half, and then glue those half circles onto the top of each joint. These also add a bit of extra strength to the fingers, so hopefully they won't break as easy. I've completed the 4 fingers per one hand, and now I just have to make the palm for the fingers to attach to. The palm is made from various toy parts and, of course, some googly eyes, as well as some of that EP400, EP200 epoxy putty to fill in all of the open spaces. And of course, an extra googly eye because why not? Once the epoxy has cured, I can drill some holes in the side and top of the hand, and then adding some wires, I can attach the fingers into place. I add a few extra pieces of styrene for details, and then I can build a second one to match. I realized I was talking about the needles earlier and then just never explained what I was going to do with them. That'll all be shown in the next section, but basically I'm going to build 2 large syringe needles to attach to each lower arm on the white plastic armor section. Alright, we finished the main build, now we can work on how things are getting attached and some accessories. To attach the legs, I've added this brass rod through the main body as an attachment point. I do a quick test fit, but I'll keep the legs separate for painting. For the shoulders, I'm going to steal the shoulders from a Bionicles, and originally the arms were going to attach up here, but that seems a bit too high for me, so instead I'll attach them a bit lower around here. Finally, we get to those syringe and needles I was talking about before. They're made from some plastic connectors, acrylic tubing, and some aluminum tubing for the needle. I've ground on one side, but they are not sharp at all, so they just look like needles, but they don't act like them. I'll assemble them about halfway, leaving one side open so that I can fill them with the medicine later. To build the medicine tanks that will attach to the back of the bot, I'll be using 2 of these large plastic pipettes. I only need the top few inches, so I'll chop it off right at this 0 line. Because I want to paint the inside of the plastic, I need to get rid of all the markings on the outside. I'll sand them off with some high grit sanding sticks and a sanding sponge. To add a bit more clarity back, I'll apply some semi-gloss clear coat. Now, it would have been better for a full gloss, but all I had was semi-gloss, so that's what I'll use. For the medication itself, I'll be using this fluorescent yellow paint. It's going to have a nice contrast against the dark paint job, and since it's fluorescent, it glows under black light, so that's pretty cool. These rods will insert into the smaller syringes. You can see that clear coat really helps with the added clarity. These 2 will get attached to the back of the robot using this connection piece here. There's a great place to connect them right here that will keep them out of the way of the arms, but still visible. And they'll get capped off with this round end piece. I'll add a few coats of that fluorescent paint to the inside, and then once everything is dry, I'll add a backing of white paint, and that will really make everything pop. I've added a standoff to the gauntlet armor, and this will attach straight into the frame. The standoff allows this piece to match the same height as the other armor, and it gives a strong connection point because these syringes will be attaching directly to this piece of armor. I build a bracket to attach the syringes to the armor with this piece of styrene, and then I'll add a bit of extra stability and support with some more thin styrene. Styrene is a great material to work with. It's very easy to cut and sand and shape into whatever you need, and it also forms with heat. I get mine from my local hobby shop, but you can also find it online. Once the brackets are made, I can attach them directly to the armor, and then I will set this whole thing aside for now. I knew this was going to be a larger bot for me, but as it's coming together, I'm really seeing just how big it's going to be. For example, this is a bot I built a few weeks ago. It's a medium to large bot for me, and this is it next to 1 leg for this guy. And this is the smallest bot I've built so far, next to that same leg. This is going to be a record-setting bot for me. I use some thin superglue to glue in the fluorescent medicine rods, then I'll cap off the other end with another connection piece. You can see here with that white backing, the fluorescent paint really glows quite a lot. I add on the cap, and then using some styrene, I'm going to add some bands around each side, partly because it looks cool and it adds some detail, but mostly because some of the fluorescent paint couldn't quite cover up all of the purple inside. The Bones and Blades. It sounds like an anime about skeletons on ice. I'm building an armature here using some armature wire, and this will become sort of a rib cage. It's not going to look anatomically correct by any means, but it will look like a rib cage. As with many of these bones, they're just kind of bone-like. They're not going to look like an actual specific bone. I'm wrapping it in this smaller wire to make it easier for the clay to stick. I think I added a bit too much though, and it ended up getting in the way, so if I ever did this again, I'd probably only do 1 layer of wire or no wire at all. I'm using Sculpey here, which is a polymer oven-baked clay that acts like normal clay, and then you bake it in the oven and it hardens. I've used it in the past for sculpting like my sandworm and my swamp monster, and I'm definitely not very well trained in sculpting, but this stuff works pretty well. Here I'm just smoothing it out with some alcohol before sending it to the oven to bake. I can do a bit more carving once it's out of the oven with an X-Acto knife. Sometimes polymer clay doesn't react very well to certain paints or clear coats, so I'm going to cover everything in this thin super glue and then sort of like buff it into it using my fingers. Not only does this give me a good base to paint from, but it also makes the clay a bit stronger so it's not as likely to crack. I made a few more of these clay structures off camera using that same technique of an armature wire with the clay and then the super glue, and they turned out really cool. I'm quite surprised with how well these turned out. I want to make a few more bones to cover up sort of like the abdomen area. So I take some more armature wire and I'm just covering it with that same clay as before. Again, these are not any anatomically correct bone by any means. They're just bone shaped. And I think they turned out pretty cool. These silicone tipped tools are great for adding texture and covering up any fingerprints I may have left. Once those have baked and fully cooled down, I can drill some small holes in them and then wire them up with some really thin garden wire. They'll attach to the main body just like this, and then the rib cage will attach just above it. So we've made it to the final bit of building, and that is to finally make these legs sharp. It's the last thing I have to figure out, and I was looking around my shop, I was brainstorming, and I just really couldn't figure it out. And I was looking up at my tools, and I saw this. My box cutter. I know all too well that this thing is very sharp, and the blade on the inside gave me the idea to just make a bunch of small blades in this kind of shape, and I'll weld them to the legs. So I went and found some styrene, cut it into these strips, and then cut them down into little blade shapes. Then I take my sanding sticks and I sharpen all 3 edges. One side will go unsharpened, as this will be the side that I weld or glue to the leg. I scrub the leg down with my wire brush to make sure that all the glue sticks, and then I just start randomly gluing these blades to the leg. I do match both legs so they have the same placement of blades, but when I was attaching the blades, I was just kind of going randomly and seeing what looked good. I even had to make a few more custom ones to fit the contour of the leg, and this battle axe blade to go on the back of the leg. So there you have it, one sharp leg, and I think this may have been sort of the easy way out, but I still think it looks cool, and there's the second leg to match. Using this liquid mask and masking tape, I mask off any areas I want to stay clear. There are a lot of pieces that I have to paint in this project. There are 27 in this image, but there's actually 28 total. There's one small piece that's missing for some reason. But either way, they all get set up on some paint stands and sent outside for painting. Ooh, outside location. This is new and very overexposed. I'm used to filming inside my shop, not outside in a sunny area. They get a coat of flat black primer and then a coat of flat white. Moving on to airbrushing, I'm going to start with the lighter colors first and then move to the darker colors. So I start with this beige color, which will be the base for all of my bones. Of course, I'll add some extra coloration and weathering to make this look more realistic, but this beige color was the best and only bone color that I really had to work from. The next color is this gunmetal metallic, and only a few pieces get this, from the tanks in the back, the arms, some of the head pieces, and the hands. For the main color of the robot, I wanted something dark so that the bones should have something to contrast against, but I didn't want just black or gray, so using a mixture of these colors here, I made a custom one I'm calling Iron Plum. This color came out really nice, and especially through my airbrush, it's a really pretty color. And at least to me, this color does seem very witch doctor-y, necromancy kind of vibes, which does fit with that overall flavor of medic. You know, necromancy, it's the cure for death. Alright, the airbrushing is finished, and now I can remove all of my protective masking and start working on some of the hand painting. I know from previous projects that my weathering techniques tend to darken my colors a bit more than I want sometimes, so in order to counteract that, I mixed up a batch of that iron plum color with a bit of white, and I'm dry brushing it over all of the original plum colors. The secondary color I chose was this burnt red. I think it's a nice complementary color to that original plum color that I made. And using some brushes, I'll hand paint that onto various sections throughout the bot. And now that we're in the painting process, I think it's a great time to give a shout out to my patrons over on my Patreon. Thank you all so very much. Your support helps me purchase materials for new builds and keeps this channel going. So seriously, thank you. Of course, there is no pressure to join, but if you'd like to join these lovely people and get a shout out in every video, plus access to some behind the scenes footage and teasers that no one else gets to see, you too can join my Patreon. There will be a link at the end of this video, on my page, and in the description to my Patreon. And if you'd like to join the core builders, I would very much appreciate it, but of course, there is no pressure. If you are liking what you're seeing, please do consider dropping a like, consider subscribing, commenting, sharing, all that stuff that is free and helps this channel grow. And if you finish this video and you're craving more from me, well, do I have some great news for you. I have got hundreds of other videos on my channel, so please do go and check those out after you're done with this one. If this is your first video of mine that you're seeing, first of all, welcome. I try to put out a video every Saturday, so I've got quite a lot to check out in the backlog, and make sure you stick around for more videos in the future. And if I'm skipping over anything in the video that you have a question about, please do ask that question down in the comment section, and I will try to get back to you if I know the answer to it. For the weathering, I'm going to start with the bones, and I'll do a layer of brown wash and then let that dry. And this will just be the first layer of color, and I'll do more of like a blackish brown on the second layer after this first one is dried. I want these bones to look old and weathered, but I don't want them to be too dark because I still want that contrast between the bone and the main body color. For the main body, the first layer of weathering is going to come in the form of this wash. It's a mix of black and brown acrylic paint with water and a small amount of isopropyl alcohol to break the surface tension. This wash layer will be applied over basically everything, and it will be the first layer that will hopefully get into all the cracks and crevices, and then I'll build more color and weathering from there. This is usually my first go-to step when it comes to weathering because it's a quick and easy step that just covers everything in an overall layer of grime and dirt. It also helps cover up any of the mess-ups and imperfections I may have made during the painting process. This next weathering technique is a chipping technique, and it's a new one for me that I'm trying for the first time in this video. I've used chipping techniques in the past with just some gunmetal metallic and a small paintbrush, but this one is supposed to look a bit more real-world realistic. I first saw it used by people who were making model tanks and like World War II airplanes. The people who paint those tanks and airplanes are much more patient and better at this than I am. But basically, I start with a slightly lighter version of the base colors, and I'm adding this sort of chipped effect here, and then I go in with a dark brown metallic color, and this is supposed to look like the raw metal underneath has been exposed and oxidized or rusted, turning it into this brown color. And I believe the lighter colors around it add sort of a contrast so that you see the brown oxidized layer more. And it also looks like the color is starting to chip away, exposing the primer underneath, which is usually a lighter primer. At least that's what I think. It looks decent. I think it would have looked a bit better if I had a bit more patience and time. But either way, I move on to the next step, which is using one of these weathering kits to add a bit more surface grime. I mostly focus this layer of weathering on the metallic areas, as that's where it shows up the best and it adds a nice rusty layer to it. I'm using a combination of a sponge makeup brush as well as just my fingers. The corners and edges of the piece tend to naturally pick up this pigment powder the best, so the best technique is to just rub it in with your fingers or the sponge brush, and that will get all the areas that you want covered. These little weathering kits are really great and they last a long time. If I was only allowed one weathering technique, I would choose these weathering kits. This one I'm using today is sort of an off-brand compressed powder pigment kit, but I also use the Tamiya weathering master kits. They're just a bit more expensive. Definitely give this stuff a try if you ever get the chance. We are in the home stretch of weathering here, and I'm just going to add a bit more rust to some of the metallic areas on the fingers, some of the facial features, as well as the blades on the legs. I'll use a small piece of sponge that I'm holding with a pair of hemostats, and I start with that darker rust, and then I'll use that lighter fresh rust on top of it, and then I'll hit everything with a wash of that rust wash to blend everything together. And now, after almost half an hour, I can finally start to put everything together. I use gap-filling superglue on most of the pieces and thin superglue on some of the joints. Using a few of these green fluorescent rods, I heat form them into a couple of medicine transfer tubes to connect the medicine tanks in the back to the syringes in the front. Now, originally this model was going to be freestanding, without a base, but unfortunately I realized at the last second that without the head it does stand up on its own, but once I attach the head it becomes too front heavy and it falls over. So in order to solve that, I will have to add a base and a couple of pins to hold it down to said base. Because this video is already quite long, I make the base off camera and just attach it with some foam safe superglue. And with that, this project is finally done. Hey, thanks so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much to Bill for creating the Big Bot Bash challenge. I had a great time participating this year. Make sure you keep an eye out for other creators' builds that will be coming out over the next week or so using the hashtag BigBotBash3. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them down in the comment section and I will try to get back to you. I read every single comment and I try to respond if I can. Thanks again for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.